Hello, welcome back to my channel and to another reaction video. This time we'll be checking out the Screk Empire. Fun fact, for a long time I kept calling them Screk Empire.
No records have survived through the ages that reveal which leader or dynasty first laid the foundations of the Eternal Palace at the heart of the font of knowledge. For a civilization so overwhelmingly compelled by the desire to understand, to have their own history lost to them was one of many tragedies that shaped their ancient race. To ensure another lapse of understanding never occurred again, since the reign of the first emperor, every visitor who passed beneath its towering gates, every council that assembled within its graceful labyrinth, was dutifully recorded and preserved for all time. The history of the Screk Empire was reflected in these logs. They marked the passage of autarchs and regent councils, noted the conquests that built their hegemony and the terrible wars that laid them low. Nowhere in these endless accounts was an outsider ever permitted to enter the Eternal Palace. The greatest kings or religious prophets, the highest diplomats and anointed statesmen, no representative of the other races of the galaxy ever saw what lay beyond its crystal steps. They never walked beneath the banners of the 10,000 surrendered nations, some so old they were thought by the younger races to be mere myth, others that many alive today would still recognize. They never fully understood the breadth of the Screk civilization. But all that changed in the 9,989th cycle of the last era, when the logs of the Eternal Palace lost their neutral, disassociated tone and grew resentful, bitter, and terrified. Hastily written logs remark on frantic meetings and evacuations. They describe that for the first time, the palace windows glow with the fires of their ruined capital, and the skies are filled by the silhouettes of enormous warships. The last entry of that vaunted chronicle tells of the arrival of another 10,000 nations, their leaders boldly striding beneath the banners of the conquered, their own flags not cast down in surrender, but raised high in triumph. No record has survived that tells of the foundation of the Screk Empire, but a perfect account exists of how it ended. Screk record-keeping, with rare exceptions, is notable for its reliance purely on the facts. First-hand accounts or opinions are most often discarded, and to outsiders, the history of their race can feel cold and dispassionate. Yet, in analyzing the extraordinary level of detail in their varied logs, it is clear that the Screk were once an intensely compassionate and selfless race. Millennia ago, they formed the center of something akin to the modern galactic community. The Screk were indisputably the most advanced and powerful race in the galaxy, freely offering their knowledge, protection, and wealth to the other species of that era.
Now when did this change and then becoming a more ruthless?
Instead, offering mediation. Many of the greatest wonders, whose ruins can still be found on hundreds of worlds, are the forgotten legacy of the Screk. Most were intended to lift not only their empire, but every civilization towards a more welcoming, more peaceful galaxy. The Gateway Network was the greatest of these, instantly binding together even the most distant regions. The Wormhole Nexus was the Skrek's largest such endeavor, eclipsing even the power of the gateways.
I don't think they've mentioned
the hyperlane network upon which Galactic Society relied would have been made obsolete, with even the smallest craft able to freely and instantaneously travel to anywhere in the galaxy. With the hundreds of millions of stars outside the hyperlane network now accessible to all, the competition for resources would end, and the era of discovery would last forever. After decades of promising work, dozens of successful tests, and seemingly no cause for alarm, the unthinkable occurred. An enormous tear split through reality itself, focused directly on a distant, uninhabited star system that was the center of the Skrek's testing sites. Entire planets, stars, and species from 100 different realities poured out of the rift in the moments before it stabilized, and then a form of life unlike anything else ever encountered. Malignant beings of pure energy radiated outwards from the rift, draining entire star systems of all biological life before moving on to the next. While the core Screk worlds were not immediately threatened, they mobilized their vast armadas to safeguard the civilizations that were. The war lasted for centuries, and with every star system lost and world purged, the Screk grew more desperate. The other, less advanced civilizations of the galaxy were no longer respected allies, but pawns sacrificed by the Screk to protect their own worlds. In a twisted betrayal of those they had intended to protect, the Screk developed a method of encasing entire worlds in unbreakable shields, intended to occupy the interdimensional invaders and delay their advance. When that failed, they drove slave armies against the foe, turning their own guns on any who dared retreat. The creatures that the Screk had come to know as the Unbidden were finally purged from the galaxy with the detonation of weapons derived from their original wormhole technology. The victory came at an immense cost. Trillions of lives had been destroyed, hundreds of planets left nothing but husks, and enormous sections of the galaxy could no longer be reliably traversed by any known faster-than-light propulsion. The Screk attempted for the next millennia to restore interstellar travel, but the hyperlanes had yet to reform. Even the conservative use of improved wormhole generators randomly snatched entire fleets of vessels from their intended targets. They were instead dragged towards the epicenter of the ancient detonations used to destroy the Unbidden, often desolated star systems, and left with no means of returning home. When the hyperlanes had finally repaired themselves naturally, and the Screk ventured back out into the wider galaxy, their civilization had been transformed. Centuries of war, followed by a millennia of hardship, had made their society cruel and unsympathetic. Where once the Screk had achieved wonders of art, science, and industry, now they lorded over a multitude of slave races, the descendants of those they had once worked with as partners. The rule of the autarchs, who had guided Screk civilizations
it makes sense that their society would change
was crippled.
under those
So much of their
circumstances.
society had been automated,
But
but
still.
as systems failed, the councils and institutions meant to fulfill their role only added to a growing labyrinth of confused and scattered groups, known collectively as the leadership caste. Informal agreements and feudal sub-empires came to drive their civilization. What little central authority remained instead lay with the archivists. But this group, one of the only such organizations to survive the collapse, had become so insular that their directives were often incomprehensible. Orders were given to worlds that had long since been lost, demands made on civilizations the Screk had already conquered. In a crushing blow to their national pride, other races less constricted by the failure of the hyperlane network had claimed large territories of the galaxy in the Skrek's absence. A series of wars were launched against their new rivals, the Vran, the Tizru, and the Banthurians. But in each instance, the Screk were forced to sign a humiliating armistice. With the will to expand their crumbling empire gone, the Screk instead turned further inwards, endlessly recounting the details of their lost triumphs and hoarding whatever knowledge remained privileged to them alone. Entire generations passed without even meager attempts at innovation. Screk society regressed further, with even much of their own technology growing beyond their understanding. The sole exception was their study of the Unbidden. Since their near extinction, the Skrek's ruling caste had grown obsessed with the idea of alternate realities. In the deepest reaches of a world they named the Archives, their scientists developed a rudimentary means of observing them. The images and data they received was splintered and often impossible to decipher, but over the course of centuries, they pieced together fragments of tens of thousands of realities.
Is one of them the Greater Terran, where the Greater Terran Union
others
exists?
so different as to defy comprehension. With the events of the outside galaxy now beyond the concern of the Screk, they stood idle as their old rivals similarly fell into ruin, and new races rose to take their place. This cycle seemed poised to repeat itself until, with unprecedented boldness and without any prior indication, the Screk sent a fleet of warships across the galaxy to an otherwise unremarkable and primitive world, its inhabitants had named Earth. Why the Empire chose to do this, and how its various ruling families had for the first time in recent memory come to act in unison, remained unknown to the general populace. It was believed, however, to be in some way related to the Unbidden, with evidence seemingly pointing to their imminent return. The destruction of the nation-states present on Earth took minimal effort, and in only a few years, the indigenous humans had become another slave race within the Empire. Yet, while most slaves would have been sent to the labor camps scattered across their territory, the Screk utilized humanity in an entirely different manner. The United Terran Protectorates were afforded a type of limited self-government, and strenuous efforts were made to conceal the Skrek's initial invasion and win the loyalty of their client race. They even shared their technology, constructing the means by which their new Terran satellite nation might assemble enormous industrial and manufacturing centers. Yet, while they were generous with much of their technology, they were puzzlingly strict with other resources. As if they were following some guide known only to them, the Screk separated the Terran citizenry into tiers, restricted basic rations, and even water. They were divided into numerous regional governments and encouraged by the Screk to fight amongst one another. Many of the Screk leaders were themselves confused by the seemingly random orders given to them by the masters of the archives, but they implemented them without question. The Screk sought to mold humanity into a society of their own design, but what design that might be remained elusive, perhaps even to them. Whatever experiment the Screk might have been performing on humanity reached a higher stage when it ordered its United Terran Protectorates to embark on wars of conquest across the galaxy. Strengthened by Screk technology, dozens of races were conquered. Yet while the younger nations of the galaxy, and even their ancient rivals, could not directly challenge the combined strength of the Screk and their Terran servants, resistance to their campaigns began to rise from an unexpected source. The Confederate Republics of Antares were dismissed as simply another trivial alien nation when the Terran Protectorates delivered news of their existence. The concept of a Screk nation-state had deteriorated so dramatically that by the time what passed for their Empire's leadership caste began observing Antares in earnest, the Confederacy had grown to become a formidable power, one even capable of rivaling the Screk themselves. That the Antares Confederacy had not only survived but endured in their corner of the galaxy was a shock to the Screk, one that shook their empire to its core. What the Confederacy referred to as the miasma was thought by the Screk to be completely uninhabitable. It was avoided at all costs by their ships, although only their archivists could say why, and the knowledge was not freely shared. What the archivists did reveal was that the presence of what was at its core, a free human nation, could not be allowed to exist. By the time the Screk ordered the extermination of the Confederacy, a preemptive strike by Antares was already underway. The Screk had believed that the first confrontation would occur near the human homeworld of Earth, and the invasion of their own worlds was seen as impossible. The loss of the archives and the mass suicide of its attendants separated the Screk from their last governing institution. When the Font of Knowledge was itself the target of Confederate landings, their empire was already gone, replaced by warlords and tyrants clinging to whatever fleets and armies remained to them. Many fled to the Terran Protectorates and were given refuge there, only to be slaughtered in their hundreds by Terran officers, their severed heads and limbs dangling from the banners of a new Terran empire.
Yeah.
When the first
Something
Confederate
much
troops
worse
entered the Eternal
rise.
Palace, the Screk leaders who
Rose from
remained,
there.
those privy to only a fraction of the atrocities their kind had committed, expected a similarly gruesome fate. Yet, perhaps the greatest victory Antares ever achieved over the Screk, the one that would lead to the eventual reconciliation and cooperation between the two, was that the Confederacy acted with mercy and restraint. While acts of vengeance did occur, and countless scenes of violence and savagery were recorded across the ranks of the Confederate armed services, they were
It's war,
severely
so it
punished
makes
by their
sense.
superiors. Such a benevolent act astonished the Screk. To see their technology, their fleets and armies, their entire worlds overcome by the Confederacy was ultimately inconsequential in the face of this display of moral superiority. It was an act that the Screk recognized they might have been incapable of themselves, even at the height of their lost empire. For the first time, they began to understand the weakness and frailty of their own society. In the face of Antares, they had become irrelevant. In reading the terms of their species' surrender, the Screk were humbled further. Their people would not be exterminated, and no acts of vengeance would befall them. Their cities would be rebuilt, and their society allowed to grow. In seeing all the rights that would be afforded to them as citizens of the Confederacy, the highest remaining individual within the Screk leadership caste is said to have muttered, "If they can forgive us, they will be the greatest nation in all reality." The mutual effort to rebuild Screk society began as a timid endeavor between the Confederacy and its newest citizens. But in time, this partnership elevated all those it touched. The ancient knowledge of the Screk improved countless lives across Antares, while the font of knowledge and its sister worlds again roared with the spark of industry, commerce, and innovation. Through the Confederacy, the pride of the Screk was restored, and the stain of their brutal history overcome. But the
That's
single
so
question
awesome.
that the government of Antares wished answered before any other was beyond the knowledge of the Screk who had survived. The purpose behind the invasion of Earth, why humanity of all species in the galaxy had been targeted. This knowledge had perished with the last archivists. Even today, Confederate scientists have scoured the endless collections of data within the Screk archives, hoping for some clue to this lingering mystery. Tragically, this information was once present there, only to be destroyed during the Confederacy's liberation of that world. In their study of alternate realities, the archivists had sought the means to reverse the fortunes of their fading empire, to find a way to resist the unbidden, whose return they knew was inevitable. But they found something far greater, far worse. Countless civilizations across countless realities had fallen prey to the extra-dimensional invaders, and what few victories had been achieved were done so only at great cost. These victors, like the Screk, were drained of so much of their power that they were doomed to extinction, just as surely as if the unbidden had triumphed. But in one reality, something else had occurred. It took centuries for the archivists to coalesce this information, but the details revealed to them were terrifying. Their species had long ago given up a belief in what humanity might have named the Devil. But in this other reality, they saw it given form. They saw a race much like their own, yet entirely different, stumble through a gateway upon a world of vast oceans and great continents. They saw a slaughter play out there, with skies filled with ash and rivers turned red by blood. They witnessed corpses branded with the mark of evil, and victorious fleets and armies bearing that same emblem cast 1,000 worlds beneath a shroud of darkness. They witnessed an entire race burned and shattered in an act of ultimate vengeance. Even the unbidden, in all their multitudes, were powerless before this raw expression of might, their own invasion driven back and annihilated. What had doomed the Screk and a million other races to a slow extinction was to this vast nation merely an inconvenience. The archivists had realized that the species they had witnessed, the one destined to create this empire, existed in their own reality. The Screk had at their command the ability to destroy it, to ensure that the power they had witnessed in the multiverse, or something like it, never emerged to threaten them. But they decided instead to attempt to control it. The United Terran Protectorates were a pale imitation, a means by which human destiny could be twisted to serve the Screk. Too late, the archivists realized that in seeking to control that power they had feared, they only served to give it a different form. A new
Antares.
colossus that arose from imprisoned lightning, divergent yet equally supreme. In studying the facets of the multiverse, the Screk brought on themselves the very fate they had sought to avoid. Had they searched deeper, studied longer, they might have realized that those realities were becoming increasingly linked, and that the boundaries between them were weakening. But nowhere more so in their own reality than on a world where millennia ago, the Skrek's wormholes had collapsed, and the unbidden had been unleashed. A world known to the Confederacy as Nakiska.
Well, there you have it for Screk Empire, and yeah, there was a lot of interesting information. I mean, I absolutely loved this one. So epic from start to finish. I hope there's more to this Screk Empire before the first war with the Unbidden, when they were seemingly a benevolent race. I mean, it makes sense, okay. Uh, Centuries of war and millennia of hardships and whatnot shaped the Shrek into a uh, more violent race. I mean, I'm not trying to justify them, but yeah, it makes sense. I mean, that's what happened to humanity. Essentially, they conquered Earth and forced them to surrender, used them like puppets. And once the Screk were dealt with, what rose was much, much worse. While Antares, who had lived in peace and harmony, all the races that joined them would become the opposite of what the Screk and the uh, Earth Empire had become gone. But yeah, so the Unbidden are conquering the multiverse, and yeah, there was a. I mean, they didn't flat out say it, but I think we just had our crossover with the GTU, which was so epic. And yeah, they had witnessed their events that they defeated the Unbidden in that reality, and they realized humanity existed in this reality, so they tried to harness that. But yeah, little did they know that Antares existed, and that was the power they feared. The Antares became the power they feared. Well, English is bad, really bad today. Yeah, what was surprising to me was that the Antares forgave the Screk Empire. Well, not it wasn't the Empire anymore, but their home world, that they would be allowed to exist, and because they were so even the Screk were rather surprised, and now their homeworld is flourishing once again with innovation, art, and whatnot. While the Screk that escaped to the Terran Protectorate, they were slaughtered. But yeah, and honestly, the Unbeaten, this mysterious intergalactic whatever, that's the least in the interesting part so far in the uh, in the in the season 2. I mean, they were in season 1, I guess, but yeah. And I mean, hopefully there's a backstory on them that can make them a lot more interesting, but so far, no. But yeah, what do you guys think? Write your thoughts down below. Hope you enjoyed my reaction. Drop a comment, drop a like, subscribe if you want, and I will see you in another video.